Federalist 60, Part 3. This is paragraph 4. Please make sure that you're reading along and you have already listened to Part 1 and 2. So this way I'm just going to read the text. But what is to be the object of this capricious partiality in the national councils? Is it to be exercised in a discrimination between the different departments of industry, or between the different kinds of property, or between the different degrees of property? Will it lean in favor of the landed interest, or the moneyed interest, or the mercantile interest, or the manufacturing interest? Or to speak in the fashionable language of the adversaries to the Constitution, will it court the elevation of the wealthy and well-born to the exclusion and debasement of all the rest of the society? If this partiality is to be exerted in favor of those who are concerned in any particular description of industry or property, I presume it will readily be admitted that the competition for it lie between landed men and merchants. And I scruple not to affirm that it is infinitely less likely that either of them should gain an ascendant in the national councils than that the one or the other of them should predominate in all the local councils. The inference will be that a conduct tending to give an undue preference to either is much less to be dreaded from the former than from the latter. The several states in various degrees addicted to agriculture and commerce. Let me read that again. The several states are in various degrees addicted to agriculture and commerce. Here, addiction, he's talking about that they are really deeply into commerce and agriculture, because a lot of people back then, a lot of farmers. In most, if not all of them, agriculture is predominant. In a few of them, however, commerce nearly divides its empire, and in most of them has a considerable share of influence. In proportion as either prevails, it will be conveyed into the national representation, and for the very reason that this will be an emanation from a greater variety of interests, and in much more various proportions than are to be found in any single state. It will be much less apt to espouse either of them with a decided partiality than the representation of any single state. In a country consisting chiefly of the cultivators of land, where the rules of an equal representation obtain, the landed interest must, upon the whole, preponderate in the government. So it's going to be predominantly, he says, the landed interest is going to be predominant. Just because we have so many farmers, we have so many small farmers, people who have land and their livelihood is based on it. As long as this interest prevails in most of the state legislatures, so long it must maintain a correspondent superiority in the National Senate, which will generally be a faithful copy of the majorities of those assemblies. It cannot therefore be presumed that a sacrifice of the landed to the mercantile class will ever be a favorite object of this branch of the federal legislature. In applying thus particularity to the Senate, a general observation suggested by the situation of this country in applying thus particularly to the Senate, a general observation suggested by the situation of this country, I am governed by the consideration that the credulous votaries of the state power cannot, upon their own principles, suspect that the state legislatures would be warped from their duty by any external influence. But in reality, the same situation must have the same effect. In the primitive composition, at least of the federal House of Representatives, an improper bias towards the mercantile class is as little to be expected from this quarter as from the other. So he constantly is reminding people that the way the power is separated, the checks and balances, limited, when you know that the term that a representative or a senator is going to serve and then come up for election is limited to either 2 years or 6 years. He says these are the ways that you can control different branches from ever planning on doing something that would be to the disadvantage of people of America. The next paragraph, in order perhaps to give countenance to the objection, at any rate, it may be asked, is there not danger of an opposite bias in the national government, which may dispose it to endeavor to secure a monopoly of the federal administration to the landed class? As there is little likelihood that the supposition of such a bias will have any terrors for those who would be immediately injured by it, a labored answer to this question will be dispensed with. It will be sufficient to remark first that for the reasons elsewhere assigned, it is less likely that any decided partiality should prevail in the councils of the Union than in those of any of its members. Secondly, that there would be no temptation to violate the Constitution in favor of the landed class, because that class would, in the natural course of things, enjoy as great a preponderancy as itself could desire. And thirdly, that men accustomed to investigate the sources of public propensity upon a large scale must be too well convinced of the utility of commerce to be inclined to inflict upon it so deep a wound as would be occasioned by the entire exclusion of those who would best understand its interest from a share in the management of them. The importance of commerce in view of revenue alone must effectually guard it against the enmity of a body which would be continually importuned in its favor by the urgent cause of public necessity. So like I said, because of so many farmers, because of the way United America is, which is totally different from Britain or any of the countries of Europe which don't have that much land, we're going to have a lot of people who will have small or larger pieces of land. So landed interest is going to be extremely important. It's going to be very influential. However, he says commerce is important too, because as we know, commerce is good for the prosperity of this country, and also he mentions revenue. Remember, in the previous Federalists, we talked about it. Hamilton talked about this, that one of the great sources of the revenue for the government, for the national treasury, so that it can pay its officers and do its job, is the tax on imports. So if there's no import, there's not going to be any tax, there's not going to be any money to run the government. So he says that part of it is extremely important to revenue of the government, so that the government, national government, federal government, can defend you all from invasion, can defend you when there's a uprising of any sorts. Just remember again, one of the main reasons that they decided to finally meet in Philadelphia and write this Constitution was Shays's rebellion in Western Massachusetts. They just didn't want to wait for too many rebellions happen, too many people that were in debt and would be dissatisfied with things and start a rebellion, and then chaos will just take over.